Hi, this is Ken Jarecke, and today we're talking pictures with photographer, photojournalist Scott Goldsmith. Scott has been working in this game for probably longer than I have. He's come up through the ranks. He started out as a newspaper photographer, went on to magazines, and now he's working on his own projects, group projects, and staying busy. Scott is a tremendous talent, and he's very open with how he works and his approach to photography. And so we're really excited to talk to him today. He's a dear friend as well. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Ken. It's great to be with you.
What you up to?
Well, I just fed the dog and joined your video chat here. I'm working on several projects. It seems like most of the time we spend is in front of the computer instead of in front of the camera, which is part of the digital game. But I remember the days when we would just drop the film off at the lab and keep shooting and go to by the next morning and pick the film up or find it in FedEx or just ship it off and have somebody else editing it. But from the time we first met when we were shooting film on the Bob Dole campaign, we never saw the film after we shot it for about 3 weeks, which is a big changer from today when you can see the picture instantly on the back of your camera.
Well, that's an interesting point. So that was back in 1996, and I've talked about that before, how you and I and who was shooting? I was shooting for Time, you were shooting for U.S. News and World Report. Who was shooting for Newsweek? Do you remember?
Well, it was Kennerly, David Kennerly, I think, was there, and Ira Wyman.
Ira, right. Okay, so what we would do is every night when we'd get to the hotel in a new city, we'd meet our courier, and our courier, usually one or two of us, sometimes, we'd put our packages together. Somebody'd make the phone call, and it would usually be the same courier coming to pick up all our film. And like you said, your film would go to Washington, D.C. Newsweek and Time film would go to New York, and we wouldn't see it for 3 weeks or so. We wouldn't see it until it got published, really. But then the other side of that coin was the guys shooting right next to us. They were already on that tight deadline where they would have physical landlines dropped into every event right at the stage there. So they would be shooting and they would be ingesting into their laptop. They'd have a hard line connected to their computer, and they'd be transmitting right away. So they would see their stuff right away, and we were kind of the exact opposite.
Yeah, I noticed that you and I both were fortunate enough to cover several different presidential campaigns, and obviously they came every 4 years. And every 4 years there was a major technical advance. The first one was the cell phone, and it was a big box phone. But what that did, that gave the reporters, it was really more for the reporters. They could get information out, not instantly, but almost instantly after the event. And then came the smaller phones, the smaller flip phones, which meant you could put that phone anywhere. And we were actually able to tap into that, or at least the people doing digital could roughly start to transmit pictures. And then the next 4 years later gave photographers the ability to actually transmit their pictures right from the site, as you were saying. And that just improved 4 years later. It was wireless, it was, first you had to connect to the cell phone, then you could do it wirelessly. And it's interesting to see the progression of our profession as it translates into campaign photography. And right now we're in the middle of another campaign. And what I'm seeing and enjoying a lot of is the fact that these photographers can send electronically a lot of great imagery, so we can see a nice slideshow every day from the New York Times or Time Magazine or any of the magazines.
So how do you think, going back to 1996, how do you think that affected your workflow and how you approached every event? For me, no, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, because you were right there shoulder to shoulder.
Well, for me, when every event, there'd be the best visual thing, but then there'd also be the campaign thing, so that like the message of the day. So you're playing two different games there. One, you're trying to make a nice picture, and two, you're trying to kind of capture the message of the day. Like if you're going to a factory somewhere, maybe it's jobs, that's the message of the day or something like that. For me, the wire guys, the newspaper guys, they had to do that not just for the day, but they had to do that for every event. So when you or I, we were shooting for a weekly, we could build up a body of work throughout the week, and those guys had to kind of they had to build up a body of work literally at each event, and then once that event was done, it was like a new week for them. So it was like if we did 4 or 5 events that day, they'd probably have 4 or 5 kind of takes for the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, the biggest detriment to that, I looked at that whole thing as a positive. We people like you and me, we were able to walk behind the stage and take a look at what was going on back there. We didn't have to necessarily worry about the moment on the stage, because our deadlines were every 7 days. And as you mentioned, their deadlines were not every day, every 6 or 7 hours. But an event like Bob Dole falling off the stage in Chico, California, we may have missed that because we were actually walking around doing something else. But the other side of that coin is that it may not have been on our deadline. If we were up there and we got that tragic moment when Bob Dole fell off, it probably would not have been on our time deadline for shooting. So the luxury for us, as you mentioned, was being able to look a little bit beyond what the campaign wanted us to see. And that was not only a luxury, but it was a good way to tell the story of the campaign, because more and more, these campaigns are incredibly polished with great people, especially as you get farther into the campaign, and they set up the backgrounds and what they want you to see, and they position you in certain areas so that you'll end up seeing what they want you to see. And as a magazine photographer, you had the luxury of bucking that system and looking for something that would be a little more telling about the campaign or that candidate, or how tired they were getting. I know that in the last 96 hours, Bob Dole's whole team didn't sleep much, so that became a story. I think they had 96 hours of to victory, which was literally no sleeping. I think we caught a couple of naps here and there, but those little things become the stories beyond the news, beyond falling off the stage. And
well, it's a good thing for Bob Dole that the wire photographers were there, because they're the ones that caught him. I mean, they could have, without exaggeration, the AP photographer could have saved Bob Dole's life by catching him when he fell off the stage.
And that's a really interesting point. David Ake is the person that caught him. His first instinct was a wonderful one. He didn't even think of photographing it. He just jumped right in to catch him and really saved him from a really harmful fall. Into that 96-hour tour, we showed up, I think it was in Liberty, Missouri. It was about 3 a.m, and whoever built the stage, they didn't build it well. And so I was on the stage as Bob Dole was exiting, and I'm leaning against the guardrail, and the guardrail literally came undone. And I was doing one of these numbers with right under me, and the photo wrangler, I'm trying to remember who the photo wrangler was for Aaron, grabbed me by the belt. I was like this, and Aaron, the 120-pound feisty
campaign photo wrangler grabbed me by my belt and kept me from falling into Bob Dole.
I didn't know
And
that.
I've got a 2x4 in my hand that came from the railing that broke at the same time. I mean, it was.
Well, she must have been really strong. I mean, you were like 700 pounds back then, I think, something like
Yeah,
that.
I've lost a little weight.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, the first time we met, it was outside. It was a high school in Flint, Michigan, and it was a Bob Dole event. And I had this. I was shooting pictures of Bob Dole, and I had this like head coming into the bottom right-hand corner of my frame, and then I realized that, oh, that's just Ira Wyman from Newsweek, and so I didn't really worry about it. I just took it for that's how it's going to be. And then I took a break and I looked over, and it wasn't, to my surprise, Ira. It was you.
Oh, well, I figured, big time Ken Jarecke, if he's doing something, I better check it out. But actually, that leads to something else. I think that one thing that's really great about the campaigns is that, it's a friendly competition, but it's a competition just the same. And it forces you to not copy what the other person's doing, at least in your case, in my case. I mean, if you were shooting something, I didn't want to shoot it. I wanted to figure out something that was better. And you were the same way. And I remember that actually, I think, hones your skills a little bit, to be in that kind of a friendly competition.
No, it's true. And it's interesting. I didn't never know what we're going to talk about on these talking pictures. But it's interesting. So you talk about the 96 hours. We literally went 96 hours straight. We did check into a hotel for, it was about an hour and 15 minutes. We checked into a hotel once just to shower. And the last...
Sacramento, California. I remember that very well.
Was it in Sacramento?
I have a funny story to tell about that, but go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I mean, why the Dole campaign was going, I know why they went to California, because we were moving with the date. We were moving with the sun for 96 or for 4 days straight. Is that 4 days, 5 days, whatever it is? And so we'd start out on the right side of the country in the morning, and then we'd hopscotch across going east to west. That's how we ended up in Sacramento, because there's be no reason. Actually, that was a good event. Was that a steak fry? No.
I remember being on stage with a young artist, female artist named Kennedy. She had red hair. You remember her? But anyway.
Really?
We had 1 hour at the hotel, and I thought, you could shower. You could pick what you wanted to do. Shower. You could maybe make a quick phone call. I decided that I would sleep for 45 minutes and then get up. Well, 45 minutes became an hour and 18 minutes. And when I woke up, everybody had left the hotel. Everybody.
Did we not do a buddy call? Usually we do buddy calls in those situations.
In this case, you've been going without sleep for 48 hours, so I'll have to let you slide on that. I got no buddy call. And so I go to the lobby, and I think part of what you do on any assignment is figure out ways to fix problems. So I found the first policeman that I could find. I explained my situation to him. He turned on his siren and red lights and took me to the airport. And within seconds, I was standing in line with the Oak Ridge boys at the back of the line, ready to board Bob Dole's plane.
Yeah, the Oak Ridge.
It was a scary moment. I started, the way out there, I was actually looking on, trying to access different flights I might be able to take in the morning to catch up with the campaign. You start to figure out or think about all the different scenarios that can get you out of this pinch. But the policeman, I think, got a kick out of the fact that he had an interesting assignment at 3 o'clock in the morning.
No, that's a great point, because it's always problem solving, and the people that survive in this business, they do figure out how to get the job done, regardless of the obstacles that's thrown in their path. So speaking of obstacles, so after that 96 hours, we woke up that day in Kansas. we had like a 2-hour drive from the nearest airport to Bob Dole's hometown where he went and voted. And then we went to Washington, D.C. And the event that night, I want to tell this story because it's kind of funny, is so it was, I forget where the event was. It was at the National Convention Center downtown Washington, D.C. And no, it was in our hotel lobby. But anyways, they had the lights set up, and Cynthia Johnson, another time photographer, had come in the afternoon and did a lighting test. So she actually shot film. She had it processed to get just nail the exposure perfectly well. And I remember we were standing in front of the stage there, and I said, okay, it's daylight at 100 ISO. It's like 125 at 2.8.
Yeah.
And so we'd been up for, quite a while. And so you loaded daylight film into your camera, and you set it up, and maybe it was like 400 ISO. I don't remember, but I'm watching you, and you pull that film out of your camera, you pull the roll out, and the roll was ruined. You toss that under the stage, and you put tungsten film in your camera. I'm like, Scott, what are you doing? It's daylight film. It's not tungsten. He's like, and you're like, oh, right. So you pulled that out. That went under the stage. And then you put daylight film back in your camera, and you put a strobe on your camera. I'm like, Scott, there's a lot of light here. Why are you putting a strobe on your camera?
That's the result of not sleeping for 96 hours.
But this went on for like 15 minutes. And at one point, and I started to get a little worried, because at one point you were taking the film out of your camera again, but you took the motor drive off your camera to do it for some reason.
You know what? I remember that very well. And I remember it was delirium. It really, truly was. And we talked about it. Like, I just couldn't, after not sleeping for 3 days, I don't know how anybody does that, but everybody on the campaign was doing it somehow, some way. And I think the adrenaline rush when Bob Dole came out that night put us right back into a normal pace. And I wasn't tired at all, until I finally got to my room that night.
No, you didn't get to your room till 3 in the morning, because everybody came to my room. Everybody was in my room. The only person that fell asleep was Ira Wyman. And Ira fell asleep sitting up perfectly straight on the side of my bed. He still had his Nikon around with a short strap hanging from his chest like this. The camera never left his chest. And it was a heavy camera, but it was always around his neck, and he fell asleep just like that on my bed. But everybody else was there till about 3 in the morning. It was we'd been up for whatever, 3 or 4 days, but we still had a good 4 or 5 hours for a little camaraderie in us at that point.
Yeah, I remember that was great. That was a melancholy way to end the whole thing, but it was perfect ending in so many ways. It was a great trip.
So that's when we first met. That's when we first became friends. And then a year or so after that, I went from Time to U.S. News and World Report. So we didn't work side by side as much with each other, but we got to hang out more, because we'd end up in Washington, D.C. or something at the same time a lot. It seemed like to me,
yeah, I remember we covered Clinton's inauguration and the couple of days leading up to the inauguration. We banded back together with some of the people we became friends with on that campaign. I remember Steve Crowley was a big part of that. And I think it was like 4 degrees outside, but we still had smiles on our face. I think we're happy to. You develop amazing friendships in some cases, like our friendship, on those campaigns, and sometimes friendships with the staff. That you realize that they're trying to solve problems just like we are.
No, I was talking to somebody about this I think, on one of these podcasts, and it doesn't really, it could be a Republican or a Democrat campaign, and you still, that has very little to do with the friendships you develop with the staff, because you're with them almost 24 hours a day, and you get to know them, you get to know about their families, and their likes and dislikes and all that, and those relationships start in Iowa, they go through New Hampshire, they go into the national campaign, and then they might go into another campaign 4 years down the road. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really affect your coverage one way or the other. You're still going to do your job as a photographer, as a photojournalist. You're going to try to make your pictures, but it does help to have an understanding with the people that are trying to manipulate you.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, you're right. You forget about the Republican-Democratic conflict, if there is one at the time, but you just kind of, it's our job to not be part of that, at least when we're taking pictures. And it's a great way to experience those campaigns, is to try to, we all have our political leanings, but it's important to try to turn that off when you're observing a candidate on the inside for the whole country, for the whole world. In some cases, like Time Magazine, when you were photographing for them, I mean, those pictures and the imagery that you made spoke to millions of people, literally. And, it was important that we both kept neutral as much as possible. I think you did a great job.
No, that's a great point, because it's really, at this point, it's troubling to me personally, regardless of your politics, that, and I was saying this, something, Time Magazine, it used to be a place where you could agree, you could disagree, but if Time Magazine pointed their spotlight at an issue or a story or a situation, everybody agreed it was worth talking about. And that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I was working for U.S. News. I think out of the 3 national news magazines, U.S. News had less circulation than Newsweek by a little bit, but certainly Time was one of the biggest circulating magazines in the country. I think it still is. And so we had a lot of fun and joked around a lot, but we took our job extremely serious. And at the end of the day, the job came first. Even though we were out having fun, we made sure everything was in place before we drank a beer.
No, it's interesting. On the campaign trail, and you've got the writers, you've got reporters, you got TV, and then you got wire and magazine photographers, and you have commentators, and you have people writing essays, and they all have their different tasks. But the conversations you get into when you're on the press plane, we'd call meetings with the photographers and the campaign, and we'd say, we got an issue with this. And they were very serious meetings that top people in the campaign would come to. If there was something, if it was a question of access, if it was a question of certain outlets getting more access or less access, we used to have these serious conversations about journalism and ethics and how you approach the job. That I think a lot of people in journalism, they kind of have those when they're in college, and then they kind of disappear when they get out into the so-called real world. But those came up all the time on the campaign trail. It was very serious business.
Yeah, it reminds me of the day that I first met you, when campaigns have what they call a buffer zone, which is basically a fenced-off area in front of the stage. It's a pretty large area. It's probably at least the size of the stage. And the campaign decided that only one magazine photographer could be in that area at a time. And I don't think I had met you yet. but I had seen you in action, and you found out about that before I did, and you were complaining in a somewhat vehement tone that you were going to go back to New York if they didn't allow everybody into the buffer, and I already had a lot of respect for you, but I gained a lot more respect after that, because I think within a half an hour of that called a confrontation, they changed the rules. I mean, to the way they should have. I think a lot of these campaign people they're new on the job and they didn't quite know the way to handle it, but you put out a message that was pretty strong. You were, and you always have been that way. You were very committed to the profession, the integrity of the profession, communicating with pictures, and you weren't just speaking of the fact that you were going to go back to New York if they didn't let everybody in. You really meant it, and it resonated, and obviously benefited everybody in the long run.
Well, I don't think these things out. I just kind of act. So, but like I got along with the person I had that conversation with. I ended up becoming great friends with them. So.
Yeah, with Aaron, I think it was. Yeah.
And I think the only other issue ever, and I've done probably 50 or 60 presidential campaigns, different people, as they drop out or whatever. The only other time I've ever had a conflict once in my entire career was, I want to say it was George Bush Jr. Was doing the Tonight Show. And so there's two entrances to the Tonight Show, and everybody, all the press, the cameramen, the wire photographers were going through the main door, which, everybody goes through. But there's another door marked that says artist's entrance. And I insisted that the magazine photographers would use that door. And it worked out in our favor that time too.
Yeah. Well, I still think, one of my biggest influences was early on was David Douglas Duncan. When I was in college, I studied political science and journalism at the same time, and working on these campaigns was like a perfect storm of a marriage, photojournalistically, for me anyway. And I still love that arena and being able to be part of it. I love the friendly competition. And I also like, as we spoke about, the immediacy of thinking and thinking quickly to outdo your competition.
No, it's a great point about Douglas and this. I mean, I think he did. Was it 68? Where you talk about smoke-filled rooms.
Yeah.
He could actually walk into the smoke-filled rooms on the Democrat and the Republican side as this well-known, kind of almost a celebrity, Life magazine photographer. He had complete access to the smoke-filled rooms, mm-hmm. which is even when, a lot of times campaigns will give somebody a staff pin, a photographer from one of the magazines or whatever will get a staff pin, which kind of gives them more access. But nobody outside of a photographer actually working for the campaign, no independent photographer has ever had that kind of access that Douglas had.
If anybody can get a hold of it, his book, Self-Portrait USA, I think you can find it if you go into bookstores still. It's not extremely hard to find, but it's a big book. I actually have it right here. It's full of huge black and white pictures that are all really behind the scenes images of that particular campaign of Rockefeller and Nixon. It's phenomenal. I mean, he was probably one of the first, if not the first, to do a really in-depth look behind the scenes of what those conventions were like. He did a lot of work before the conventions, but certainly a big influence on me. When I look through it today, I think, wow, it's still just as powerful as it was back then.
No, that was a great year. I mean, Epridge was doing the same stuff in '67 with Bobby Kennedy. That they never made it to the convention, um, but Epridge was kind of the guy who was, you know, getting behind the scenes with Bobby. David Douglas Duncan had that uh, gravitas where he could just kind of work his way into both sides, and that hadn't been done before. So that's a high level of achievement. Those two guys together, Life magazine.
Yeah. No, it's. I pulled it out just before we started talking and looked through it, and it's just an amazing compilation of black and white imagery, probably all shot on 35 millimeter Tri-X. You know, it's just incredible.
Yeah, so I'll put a link to that book. I've had a copy that I bought a copy probably I don't know, a long time ago, but it was pretty cheap back then. I'm sure we can find a link that has good copies for not much money. So
Yeah, I think it's definitely a book that everybody should have in their photographic library. It's one of those game changers for a lot of people that are intrigued with this particular type of photography, like me and you.
No, that when you think about those books, so that was one of them. The other book, which is about the same size, which I probably, if I pulled it out today, I probably still have it memorized, The Best of Life.
Yeah.
And then the third book in that kind of trifecta is the Look magazine version of The Best of Life, whatever that one's called.
Yeah.
But those three books, I mean, I studied those until, I'd study them over and over again.
Mm-hmm. My grandmother gave me a copy of The Best of Life when I was growing up. I don't know what age I was, probably entering high school, somewhere in that time frame. And
my grandma gave me a pack of smokes.
Wow.
She said, "Kenny, I don't know about this photography business, but here's some Camels."
Yeah, well, a lot of the cool photographers back then smoked, so maybe she was trying to help your photography. Think about it.
Either that, or she thought I was French. One of the two.
Sometimes you lose your ability to remember your grandchildren well. She could have thought you were French. With the Nebraska accent, you never know. But I did. I looked through it too. So I remember I grew up in a small town in Indiana, and I was lucky because the newspaper there was the best photo paper in the state. Year after year, there was a guy named Ed Breen there, and they just killed it with photojournalism, which was exciting to me. And we would get the Chicago Tribune every day also, which had a picture page every day on the back, a picture story. And it was just like heaven to sit there every single day and to look at this black and white picture essay.
So what years are we talking about, and how old were you?
It was probably 1973, something like that. The Chicago Tribune was bustling, and the Chicago Sun-Times was around, and Chicago Daily News. I think they had 3 papers up there in Chicago. We lived about 2 hours from Chicago, but we had to have the paper shipped, and we got it a day late. Anyway,
that's incredible. So you grew up in a house with 3 different daily papers.
Well, no, we just got the local paper, the Marion Chronicle Tribune, and the Chicago Tribune. And that's because my father was from Chicago, and so was my mother, and so they wanted to keep in touch with Chicago. But I can vividly remember just sitting there and staring at those newspapers at an early age, just thinking, this is really, really cool stuff. It resonated so deeply. And then, of course, I did the high school thing, where the high school yearbook and high school newspaper. And another lucky part, when I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, the editor of the Marion paper gave me a summer-long assignment. And during that summer, I was working on an assembly line in a factory sanding Corvette body parts on an assembly line. It was, in retrospect, it was a miserable job. I didn't really realize how bad it was. You could only wear one set of clothes all summer, and you couldn't wash them because the fine fiberglass particles, if you were to have put that into the washing machine, would have contaminated everybody's clothes. So you put the same pants on, same shirt every day for summer, and you go in there. But I remember really enjoying the fact that I got to know these people that had been doing it for 20 years, and getting to have lunch with them and talking with them. And that, looking back on it, that's kind of what we do all the time. We're going into unique areas, meeting unique people, unique situations. We're researching those places before we go, but a lot of the research happens on the spot. And I think the reason I loved that summer job so much, even though it was hot and incredibly itchy, was the fact that I got to talk to these people every day and laugh with them and learn about their way of life. As a part of Marion, unfortunately, every city has socioeconomic divides, and Marion's not excluded. And
so this is incredibly interesting, because you're one of these nuanced photographers. You're like a Gray Villette that can like go in and make a photo essay out of the used car salesman. You have that skill, you have that talent. And so I'm wondering where that comes from. And so we already covered one thing. It's a problem solving. You can solve problems.
yeah,
But being able to talk to people, whether they're the mayor of the city, the richest factory owner in the city, or the guy who's been working at that factory for 20 years.
yeah.
That's huge. And then this idea that you were seeing this daily work from these two newspapers, plus whatever, Life magazine just went out of business in late 72. So, but that would have been an influence. The images from the books you were reading, those all kind of come together to create this fertile ground for you to develop as a photographer.
Yeah. So I talked to you about how you got started, and I'll get to that in a second. But during that summer in the factory, the editor of the newspaper gave me this assignment called Washington Street, which was the longest and only street that went from one end to the other. It's probably about 5 miles long. And after work, or before work, depending upon which shift I worked in the factory, I would walk that street. And the rules I set out for myself, you had to be able to see it from the street. And then it was part of the story. And for 3 months, all summer long, I walked up and down Washington Street meeting people. Too much to get into now, but it became a project at the end of the summer that they made into a magazine story in the Marion newspaper, which helped me get a foothold in college. But anyway.
How old were you? That was
actually, you know what? It was after my freshman year in college, and I thought I was going to be a political science major. But my love and passion for photography just changed that. I just couldn't help myself. I enrolled in a journalism class after my freshman year and took a photojournalism class. Most of the classes were based around writing. At Indiana, they treated the photographers the same way that they dealt with the writers, all the same classes. It wasn't heavily photo driven. You kind of had to figure a lot of it out on your own through internships. They had great teachers, Will Counts and John Olhauser. Will Counts made an iconic picture from the desegregation movement in Little Rock of Elizabeth Eckford being screamed at as she walked to school on the first day. So these were we were being taught by two teachers that had a great heart and soul and care and realization of photojournalism. But by and large, you kind of had to go out and figure out a lot of it on your own and do it by experience and meeting people. And so getting back to I
love one of the things you always say to people when you're talking to them, and you use this line so many times and always cracks me up, but it works every time. And you'll be talking to somebody on the street and you'll say, just between us.
Yeah, just between you and me. Sometimes if it's 7 people, I'll say, just between us 7 and nobody else. Yeah, so that's a good point. One good way, this people that have been doing this a long time have already learned this, is to use humor to break up tense situations. I remember I was in a situation with a couple of other photographers. It was part of a project I was working on in Pittsburgh with Lynn Johnson and a couple of other people. And she said something really funny in a very tense situation, and it was perfect. Everybody was friends after that. And I mean, you're one of the funniest.
Because normally Lynn's not very funny. I mean, Lynn Johnson's one of the most fantastic photographers in the world, but you wouldn't say she was like a funny person.
Not at all. No, but she knew, I mean, but she's smart, you know, she knew, I don't think she knew that the only way to break the tension of that moment was with something comical. She commented on the guy's hands being huge, and
right.
We thought it was funny and we all laughed. And
but do you think that's calculated, or do you think that's just instinct learned from experience? How do you think?
It's part, you know, we're talking about the bits and pieces that help us do our job. And that's another one of them. It's being able to read people, to feel the moment, to know what's necessary. That's a problem solving method to create humor at the appropriate moment. I think, yeah, it was semi-calculated, but it was spontaneous at the same time. I mean, she realized the situation, if it kept going, where it was going to keep us from getting access to what we were trying to get. And more often than not, you'll do the same thing. You'll crack a joke to break the ice and get to where you want to go. I know I do it. In this case, she did it, and I remember it vividly. It was a important moment. I think it's calculated, but it's an instinctual calculation. It's a meshing of different things.
Yeah, I mean, because the whole issue is you can't make pictures if you're not in the room, and you got to get in the room.
Yeah. Is that your cat meowing there?
That's my daughter's cat. That's Frederick.
Frederick.
Yeah.
Keeps you company.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, we have a sometimes lonely, isolated job, which I think is fine for me. I think it actually, you know, I have one of the genes in my body is kind of a loner gene. So I feel good being alone, working alone. And I think it can actually tune you more into some of the nuanced behaviors around you if you're comfortable being alone.
So what you've I mean, U.S. News, I don't know if I think it might be a website now. I mean, it might be special issues like the best hospital issues or something like that.
Yeah.
But since U.S. News, I mean, that was rough. I guess we should talk about that a little bit, because we both kind of went through the same thing where we had like the greatest director of photography in the world, and she left, but it was okay because her deputy was the greatest DOP, you know, and then she got fired. No, she didn't get fired. I should take that back. They gave her the option of firing 2 people or resigning herself. She threw herself on her own sword and resigned. And then the next DOP was brilliant. So, but it's like every 6 months we had a new DOP, and by the end of the process, and I you know, and they killed our contracts at some point, and I don't remember what the situation was, but I had to call up to get to track down some film or something, and the guy who I didn't really know him. I just knew he was in the mail department. But by the time I called up the magazine looking for something, for some reason, the guy who was the director of photography was the guy who was running the mail department when I first came there. When we first, I mean, it just went from, it just, we saw it just dissolve in front of us.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you have a pretty good take on it, on the profession in general. I think after 9/11, when budgets for advertising were cut, that left less of a news hole, left less assignments, there was less revenue for the magazines because of the lower budgets, which meant fewer contract photographers. 9/11, if you look through history about what happened in the magazine world, was a big changer economically, which filters down into coverage by photographers and writers. And I just remember things changing drastically, which is probably part of why U.S. News had difficulty financially. They certainly were doing great things. They certainly had, of all the three magazines, I felt U.S. News and World Report. You want to take that, Ken, while we're on the air here?
no, I'm trying to get rid of it. Jeez. I put the do not disturb on.
Yeah, I think you left that on purpose so everybody would think you're extremely in demand and really busy, and it's a good.
That was the director of photography from U.S. News and World Report. I don't take their call anymore.
No, well, when you get big time like Ken Jarecke, a lot of things change, a lot of heads roll. There's a lot of name calling, a lot of feelings are hurt, and things just change. It's
feelings do get hurt. What?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're saying 9/11 was
I look back, and so it changed things. So that led to a downward spiral. The right after 9/11, there were a lot of economic changes, and certainly print was one of them. And then it was followed by the web. So it was like a little bit of a storm. First you had this tornado, and then you had a hurricane called the web, and nobody really knew what the web was in terms of communication. Nobody was charging for web content. Everybody would give you an assignment and say, it's just for the web. We're not going to pay that much. It's just for the web. And suddenly the web is growing to a point where it's going to, if it hasn't already taken over segments of visual communication and verbal communication, if it hasn't already done that, it's going to eventually wipe out a lot of print, and it already has wiped out a lot of print. A lot of newspapers have fallen away and gone out of business. And
so what happens to the young Scott Goldsmith in Marion, Indiana today, or Illinois? You're in Marion, Illinois?
Marion, Indiana, but there is a Marion, Illinois.
There is a Marion, Illinois. There's a class 5 prison there.
And then
I spent like 3 days there. I met a lot of interesting people.
Do you want to talk about the crime you committed?
The crime was, I think I took a job from the Daily Telegraph or something like that, and that was it was their weekly magazine. They had a weekly magazine back there, but we had to talk to all these prisoners. And at one point we were locked in this room, and this is like serious prison, like guys that you only read about. They're in the cells there, and there's no contact between prisoners or anything. And so we went in this room, and we're interviewing this guy who killed a bunch of judges.
Oh, God.
He was a white supremacist or of some type. And I set up some strobes, and I realized that I was set up one of my strobes directly into the surveillance camera that was watching us, with the guards watching us to, supposedly protect us. And I was blasting my strobe into this surveillance camera. So I'm sure I burned it out within seconds. And this guy, he starts asking me questions like, oh, so your last name's Jarecke. How do you spell that? And he was convinced that you know, he had, I don't know, I think he thought he was going to get a gift. He could kill a Jewish person that day. I mean, I'm serious. It's kind of funny to laugh about now, but there was no surveillance. The umbrella was blocking the camera anyways. Then I strobed into it so many times. There was no, and it started to get kind of serious.
Well, then prison, maybe you came very close to entering the prison a different way, it sounds like.
Yeah, I would have entered like on my feet and left on a stretcher.
So the way I found out there was
I don't know what that has to do with so my question is, so Marion, Indiana, what happens to the Scott Goldsmith that's 14 years old? He's in Marion, Indiana today. He's not reading 2 newspapers a day. The local newspaper is on its, deathbed. The Chicago Tribune isn't doing photo essays. There's no such thing as Life or really Time or Newsweek or any of that. What happens to that guy? I mean, if you had been, a poli-sci major, would you know more about politics today as a poli-sci major than you do than you learned as a photojournalist, for example?
Yeah, well, the dichotomy between those two is different. It's so much fun to learn things on the internet. Well, obviously we didn't have that in college. So yeah, I probably would have learned more with political science just because I could constantly be looking at stuff and I didn't have to walk to the library. But in terms of photojournalism, there's a huge difference between comparing it to political science as you just did. There's a huge difference. I think that, oh gosh, it's overwhelming, really. I think ethics have changed a lot. I remember when I first started, I wouldn't take a cup of coffee from somebody thinking, oh, you can't take a cup of coffee from them because then, they expect something back. I've since learned that taking that cup of coffee is a way to bridge a gap and become more intimate with them. But the point I'm making is that our ethics, I know I've talked to you about that, we're so strong that we wouldn't change anything. Well, now we have Photoshop, which people are using in extremely unethical ways. So it's hard to learn from seeing the Chicago Tribune. It's hard to learn because it's not there. The picture page, Life magazine, on, as you just mentioned. But now you're faced with ethical problems that make people not believe photography. And in many cases, it's justified that there's an alteration. I don't think I'll ever change just because there's Photoshop, but you mentioned the 14-year-old coming up. They're coming up with taking people out of backgrounds and altering things. And so it's a huge change in the playing field. I don't know how to sum up how it's going to affect the broader long game of photojournalism, but I worry about it. I see a lot of, because budgets are slashed at newspapers or not necessarily newspapers, but magazines, they only have time to send somebody into a really intriguing story. They only have time for environmental portraiture. They don't have enough budget maybe to have them stick around to uncover what that person drinking a cup of coffee in the diner that's losing business, what's his life like back home on the farm or at his house or in his office or wherever he works or she works. So, those are the kinds of things we were able to do. We were able to spend sometimes a week for 3 or 4 pictures or maybe 4 or 5 pages. And so that's changing too. There's so many things that are converging, that are changing, that are hurting photojournalism and the way people are communicating things. It's part of it comes from having less great publications like Life and great picture editors like Bobby Baker Burroughs and some of the other great Time Life picture editors that you work with specifically. when you were doing a lot of work in the Time Life building. And part of it just comes from a lower bar, because the bar that these people are starting out with is not lower on purpose. It's lower based on reality. It's just because of all the things I just mentioned and some of the things you mentioned. You have a little bit lower bar and a little bit lower expectation from some of the people going out there taking the assignments. I think you've probably experienced that too. You know, it's a reality of the economy. It's a reality of a lot of mergers wanting to make more and more dividends for their stockholders. And, you know, I was lucky to work for a newspaper that was family owned in Louisville, Kentucky, the Courier Journal. And they had a very slim profit margin. They had a company plane, and they spent tons of money covering the news photographically and editorial. And that's not happening. You know, Gannett bought them, and Gannett had a big concern for their stockholders and took away the company plane and a lot of other things that helped them communicate. And I don't know the answer to your question, but I know some of the things I just mentioned are part of the problem. I don't know what that 14-year-old boy is going to do. I think that, you know, if they're extremely smart, industrious, and are willing to work in a factory and have a photo project after work and, you know, really bust their rear, as I know we did, they can still be great photojournalists. They can still do it. And it's just going to be a little tougher, I think.
So one of the magazines had a cover story that this week or last week, which is exactly what you described. And I don't want to name the magazine because I just, you know, I don't want to like call attention, because the photographer, it was like working class people in a diner type of thing. Okay. And the thing that, and I don't pick up this I go into Barnes and Noble like once every 2 weeks, and I get a stack of like 20 magazines, and I go through them and I figure out who's doing what and what's looking good, who's being successful at their mission and who's dropping the ball. And so anyways, this was a cover story, and you could tell that the person might have had 2 days. They may have only had 1 day, and it was a cover, it was an opener, it's probably like 5 or 6 pictures inside. And it was a really good story, but you could tell the photographer didn't have the time to really, and they're probably really happy with getting that much ink and getting a cover and all that kind of stuff. But to me, it just was like the tip of not even the tip of the iceberg. It was just like barely scratching the surface of what was, you could see what was there. And when we talk about all these things, when we talk about photography and working hard to be honest and all that kind of stuff, and communicating with your fellow citizens across the street or across the country, whatever, photography has always been that thing that could bridge the gap. It's that universal language. You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to read the New Yorker to get the message that the same message that you can deliver with photography. You don't have to read the New York Times every day. You can, like, even the kid who's, you know, pre-high school, a picture story about an auto plant on the back page of their newspaper that they just stumble across gets them into subject matter and knowledge that they would never dig into if a story with a 5,000 word story they'd never even glance at that. But the picture story, there's something there that can draw them in. It's universal. It's a universal language.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on an example of what I was just talking about. I don't know if that's because I could probably make a good guess as to why there wasn't a more introspective look at that story photographically, and it would be because of the economics, the budget.
No, but it's worse than that, Scott, because you mentioned the environmental portrait. Now, an environmental portrait is considered photojournalism.
Yeah, well, there you go. And that comes from the lowered bar of, I mean, my biggest concern, not biggest, one of my big concerns fits into this mold. Like, what do you tell young students in college? I mean, you're going to only be in college for 4 years, maybe 6, maybe longer, but where are the jobs?
I got it done in like 2 myself, but
what's that? Oh, 2. I know people very well that have been in for much longer, but yeah, I mean, so the goal is to get a job. I mean, that's the goal, right? I remember you telling me when you were playing football for the University of Nebraska that you're
at Omaha. Go ahead.
Okay. So your coach would tease you and say, "Hey, why do you want to be a photojournalist? You're not going to make any money." Well, back then you couldn't make huge money, but you could make a good living at it. And I think we've done okay. But today, I mean, there's fewer and fewer jobs because everybody's got a phone,
But there's fewer jobs, but there's also fewer outlets. I mean, Instagram, right? Facebook, but is that engaging? I always go back to Country Doctor. If you see Country Doctor on Instagram, does that engage you? If you see Nurse Midwife on Instagram, yeah. Do you get $100,000 to build a clinic for that nurse midwife? Is it engage them? Does it engage the viewers? Or is it instantly forgettable like a Coca-Cola?
That's interesting comment you just made, because I think today it's easier to get donations because of Kickstarter and different things like that for important stories like the midwife. But then it doesn't resonate as well as it does on the printed page. I mean, how many times have you looked at Country Doctor? Probably over 100 in your lifetime. You just want to go back and look at it again. Like every good story, Minamata and everything else that you just were taken with so intimately at a young age, those things are still living, where it's almost impossible to go back on somebody's Instagram feed because there's so many people on Instagram, and you're just not going to go back in history. Yeah, I think the ways people are communicating are so.
I did a story, and it had nothing to do with me, but it just had to. The subjects of the story were so compelling, and it was for People magazine, and it was kind of a life magazine story for people, and I probably had 2 weeks to shoot it. And this is in the internet age, and not because of me or not because I'm a great photographer or anything. The story was so compelling that without any Kickstarter or anything else, People magazine got enough donations sent to the magazine that these people were able to buy a house.
Oh.
Okay. That's modern era stuff that wasn't, certainly wasn't People magazine's, motivation to tell this story to, get these people a house or anything like that. But it happened. And I don't think it would have happened if those same pictures just would have ended up on Instagram.
No, I mean, it would. So you've asked a really important question, because, visual communication is probably the most powerful communication since caveman, besides sign languages and actual language.
Speaking of the New Yorker, okay, I saw a cartoon this week. It was like 2 cavemen looking at a cave painting, and it was like one of them says to the other, they're looking at the caveman painting, and they're like, "Oh, so-and-so already ruined the ending on this one for me." That's visual communication. That's all we're doing. We're telling the stories that these people did this. This was important. They got a gazelle and they got to eat that day. and we didn't paint it on a cave, but we told it in the picture. We next best thing, we told it on the pages of paper.
What do you think is going to happen? Where's this going? I mean,
I know where it's going. I'm not sure that I want, to reveal it like right now, but I know I have a pretty good idea where it's going, because I've been talking about this for 15 years now. If I've been talking about this since my first blog, and pissing people off who are now like, second or third on the masthead of big magazines, the direction from the start was clear. When you talk about removing revenue, the revenue was removed by giants in the internet industry who took the lion's share of the advertising dollar. So the magazines were still stuck with the overhead of creating content and distributing content, but the majority of their advertising went to a third party that didn't have any of those burdens. That's the same today. So what happened is, we saw what was happening in the photography world. You'd get to be whatever 30 years old in the newspaper business, and the only way to make more money as a newspaper photographer was to become a newspaper photo editor. And so right when people started getting good, they got pulled out of the field. Well, now that's accelerated to the point where anybody who isn't who has experience, they can't afford to be a photojournalist anymore. They really have to get creative just to fund this, but then they don't have any distribution. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things happening. And I talked to a guy, a couple weeks ago, and I asked him, what's the end game? How does it work out? How does it all make sense in the end? And part of that thinking with the younger generation is this idea that, you can shoot news on 4 days of the week and shoot advertising on 3 days of the week. But then that's a big, do you want your writers writing jingles for Coca-Cola on the weekends? You wouldn't accept that from your writing staff. So why would you accept it from your photography staff? And then if you're a newspaper, the New York Times, do you want to send somebody to Coca-Cola headquarters to do a story on Coca-Cola in Atlanta, Georgia, about, whatever, a negative effect on teenagers and their blood sugar levels, whatever? You're going to shoot these pictures of the, at Coca-Cola headquarters. Is that photographer working for the New York Times? Where are their true loyalties? Because right now they're at Coca-Cola headquarters, meeting with people, having access to people that they could never get a meeting with as a freelance photographer. But now they have that access. They can strike up a conversation. They can say, they can drop off their portfolio while they're shooting pictures. They can give a link to their website, to their Instagram, to that PR person who's managing that interview where they're shooting pictures. That's a real conflict.
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. I mean, it gets back to the ethical conflict aspect, but it's weaved in there with survival. So, survival, if you can't pay the bills, you can't survive. So I think all photographers that have done, maybe all, I know probably you have too, a little bit of corporate work here and there just to be able to pay the bills.
Well, normally you're not going to say no, because it's 20 or 30 times the amount of money you're used to making, and you have real world, you have a family, you have people that depend on you. So yeah, but what if you're spending all your time trying to get that advertising work and the editorial work and this is what it's becoming, the editorial work is just an icebreaker to get you the advertising work.
Yeah, that's troubling. I mean, it's troubling, but it's a reality that has been. There you go. That's one way to quiet the cat. It's troubling, but it's the new reality that started after 9/11. I could just trace it all back to 9/11 because there was a huge shift in dollars after that, and it's like a domino, big street of dominoes, and we're well down that street of dominoes falling. I don't know. I can't. You don't have an answer for it, really. I don't think I do. I mean, just yesterday I read that the National Geographic had 80 people laid off, and they don't have a huge staff anymore. And the National Geographic is one of those institutions that has done and is still doing important journalism, on important topics of the day. So it's concerning when a publication like the National Geographic loses such a huge amount of people. They need more people. They need, but they're part of that problem of being purchased by mega corporations and like Fox.
See, I don't feel bad for National Geographic because I think they brought it on themselves, and I don't want to start a fight with anybody from National Geographic or anything like that. But when Rupert Murdoch bought them, and he bought them just for the TV, not for the print side, but when he bought them, this not-for-profit organization had over $300 million sitting in their bank account that they weren't using it was just sitting there. If you're a non-for-profit, the way you make yourself undesirable to outside people like Rupert Murdoch is to spend all that money. That's what you're there for. You're spending it, you're creating content, you're churning it out. But instead, National Geographic, as they have this $330 million sitting there in a pool, they're going after photographers' rights. They are cutting assignment days down from 6 months or 8 months to under a month. So your in-depth assignments are now getting done in an eighth of the time. They're hiring less photographers. They're assigning less photographers. They're going full blown onto Instagram and giving away their content with no return. And then they wonder why somebody like Rupert Murdoch buys them. And it's not Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch immediately, then they got this is happening from Disney. Disney owns everything now, including National Geographic. And Disney has National Geographic to them is the Lion King. And the Lion King, the cartoon, the digital cartoon that's out in theaters now, that's going to make $300 million look like chump change at the end of the day. These guys are playing. So this is what they're playing a game that is so beyond what anything that print ever thought about doing. It's not even. It's meaningless to them. And you can go back to the very beginning. You can go back to the first time Life magazine died. It died because the business side screwed things up. But when I was working for Life magazine, the reason it died wasn't because it wasn't successful or people didn't like it. It was making money. It was doing well. The problem, and it was Time, Life, CNN, Warner Brothers at that point, was that it wasn't making enough money for the calorie burn. You can't compete with the investment ratio with something like Madonna or the latest Tom Clancy film when you're doing serious work in a Life magazine. It's not about making money, it's about making a lot of money.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, that's been exacerbated.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah, no, it's frustrating. It's frustrating for somebody like you, I would imagine, especially because you have a great history with not just Life and Time, but other publications in the Time Life building, and you knew firsthand, as did many of us, how great it was. It's hard. It's hard to see less being accepted, or acceptance for less. That is, I don't know. Maybe I don't see how it could ever go back because of the dynamic of the one percenters versus the rest of us. That gap is widening and filters down to photojournalism and communication.
Well, I think we've devalued it so much. When Time Magazine decides to cover a hurricane, this is what, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when they decide to cover a hurricane that's coming and going to hit New York City with iPhones as a gimmick, nothing more than a gimmick.
Yeah.
That devalues your whole platform. It devalues your whole art. Like I said, I'm happy to call photojournalism art, because when it's done really well, it is an art. It transcends just what's happening in front of the camera lens. But as soon as you make that decision that the mechanical process of photography is more important than what the photographer is witnessing and trying to share with others, you've lost.
Yeah, that's good. That's an interesting story you just brought up. I don't have a problem if an important news photograph is captured with the only camera you have, and that happens to be an iPhone. But what troubled me about that story, about that situation, I should say, is that they bragged about it like that, like the tool was equally as important. Not equally, but the tool was important. The tool is just a tool. It's like a screwdriver, or anything else. The camera is just a camera. It's sometimes all you have is your iPhone. But I agree with you that the fact that it was an iPhone became part of the intrigue of their elaboration of that situation.
It was a PR gimmick. They bragged about their Instagram hits, and the so-called intellectual people in the photography world bragged right along with them how this was a brave new world of photography, and it was a misconception. It was a mistake from the start, and and Time Magazine has a history of that. I mean, if you want to talk about Time Magazine, but the publishing industry, its boneheaded moves outweigh its intelligent moves, more often than not. But Time Magazine takes the cake.
So I wanted to ask you, you're an important part of Contact Press Images. You have been for a long time. Some of the best photographers around, like David Burnett and Youngie Kim and many, many others, have been part of Contact Press Images. Where do you see the really great journalistic agencies like Contact Press going, and are they able to still, as a business model, help careers like they helped yours in the beginning because of all these changes? Or do you see them making their money in a different way? They're still at the top of their game in so many ways. But
well, I mean, it's complicated because it's all connected. It's all connected, and there's no I can't even. I'm not prepared to tell some stories right now. But it's just there's no Newsweek to bid against Time, and there's no U.S. News to scrape up what's ever left between those two. there's no fight, there's no contest, there's no competition, and all that trickles down into the medium itself. If there is only, I mean, you can use Hollywood as an example. If there's only so many films being made a year, how many of those are going to be tried and true? The part three, the part four of the superhero movie. When you're spending $100 million to make a film, $100 million to market the film, you can't take any risk. You can't take the risk on an unknown director, an unknown face. You need A-listers across the board, and there's only so many films being made. And so that's why, if you look at these other avenues, Netflix, Amazon, YouTube, whatever, independent films in general, there is that hunger out there, and there is that audience, and now they were the tail, and now they're leading Hollywood. So you're more likely to see a great series on HBO than you are to see something original on the big screen. So that said, when people say, there's no going back, and 99%, 99.9% of the people say there's no going back to this great age of photojournalism. And I've always been like that 0.1% that says, no, there is. And then not only is there a way to do that, but it's almost crucial to the survival of our nation to do that.
Which is another tragedy right now. I always think the president should be documented with a great photojournalistic archive, and it's not happening right now with this president. But one way to make money and still do good stories, I think, is to apply for grants. There's a lot of places out there, and there's a lot, you have to think outside the magazines. I don't know exactly where all those places are, but I do see a lot of important projects, really good projects being done by foundations that have helped these photographers through grants. That's one way. I mean, I guess that's always been around, but as you search and hunt and peck for ways to communicate meaningful stories and still pay the bills, it's an option.
Yeah, I think the meaningful stories can still be shot, but I don't know what the platform is for getting people to experience them. That's actually that's as big an issue as shooting the stories. I mean, people like you don't have to go to an exotic locale to make amazing pictures. You can walk out your back door and tell your neighbor's story, and it's going to cost you your time. It's going to cost you your time away from doing something that might make more money. So it is an investment in that way, but you could tell a person's story that we should do this sometime. This would be a great, I've thought about doing something like this in the past. Going out and just, you get to pick one guy, you get to pick one person for me, and I get to pick one person for you. So we're walking around Pittsburgh, downtown Pittsburgh, and you get to pick a person for me to tell their story, and I get to pick a person for you. And then we spend like a week trying to do that story. That I think would be fascinating. And it seems crazy to think that you could do that, but that's really what we have been doing for our entire careers. Sometimes the person would get picked by a writer. Sometimes we wouldn't even know who that person was before we started the story, but it's in our skill set to do that. So telling that story isn't the hard part. The hard part is getting other people to to see that story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be fun. I think that'd be a fun project. You should come to Pittsburgh. We should try it. I don't know where it's going to end up or where we can get funding to do something like that. Maybe not at all, but it'd still be fun to hang out with you. So come to Pittsburgh and pick somebody for me.
Or you could come out here.
Yeah, do you have people out
There's people here.
There's people?
There's a few.
When I see pictures of Montana, I see pictures of you, and then I see mountains. I don't see other people. So,
Those mountains make me a little nervous, a little claustrophobic. I like to be able to see a good 100 miles.
Yeah.
Mountains, they block my view.
Well, you've got those long lenses. You can probably see a long way with those.
Yeah, I can. I couldn't even see the moon.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know what? The thing about right in your backyard is always been part of my wheelhouse. Like my teacher, Will Counts in college, said, you don't need to go to exotic places to tell meaningful stories. And fortunately, I've been able to do a couple of stories. One I didn't even realize I was doing on the inner city family in Cleveland. Spent a lot of time with them, really well below the poverty line. During a particular period, and then I lost contact with them until they called to tell me that his name's Lorenzo, had been shot and killed during a drug deal, and I've reconnected with the family since then. And so now the kids that I spent time with 20 years ago are having kids and falling back into that trap. And it's a really interesting, I'm glad I had that gap, because that gap is part of the story. That, you have this set of kids and they grow up in this amazingly tragic situation in Cleveland. And then there's this 15 to 20 year gap. And then you come back and the kids have taken on the same role that their parents had. And it's really, anyway, my point is that there's these great stories in your backyard. An immigrant story that I'm working on with this group of photographers in Pittsburgh, or air quality. Pittsburgh's had a lot of problems with their air. We did a group project on air quality, and
so you did air quality. You're doing this immigrant project. You've got another book in the works. I don't know if you want to. I'm pretty fascinated with the book you're doing in Washington, but I don't think you want to talk about that. But I do want to talk about these immigrant pictures, and you sent me some, and I'm going to take over our screen now, and we're going to look at them. Can you see that?
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
So, are you going to punch one up?
Well, yeah, I'm trying. I'm a little slow with this whole internet thing. Okay.
Okay, so this is a story on immigration. Immigration is huge. I mean, immigration can be so many things. Everybody has immigrant histories. So much similar to the Farm Security Administration, which, as everybody knows, is a group of photographers telling a broader story. A guy named Brian Cohen got some funding to do group projects with several photographers in Pittsburgh, where we all took a story like immigration and decided how we were going to do it in different ways. What you saw, that picture that was on the screen
I
there.
want to try to, I was getting cropped, so I'm going to show them like this because it's a little more cluttered, but at least you can see the whole frame this way.
That's okay, it's a cropped. If you take that slider, is this Photo Mechanic?
Yes.
Just slide that slider up. It'll make the thumbnails bigger, I think. Is that slider active? I don't know. Anyway. No, you know what? I don't mind if it's cropped a little bit. You can, I think it's from, at least from my computer, they're hard to see.
Is that okay? Can you see?
Go ahead and punch it up. Punch it up big. I think it's easier for me to see big.
Okay.
You don't mind.
No, whatever.
So what I did, I met a family from Bhutan, which is right next to Nepal. The minute they got off the plane, and it's cropped a little bit, but that's okay. They're learning how to use a lock on the door. This is their first day in Pittsburgh. And where they came from, they didn't even have a door on their house, let alone a lock. So they're all gathering around learning how to use a lock. And what I was trying to do was show the immigrant experience from a grassroots level. They had just been moved to Pittsburgh out of a refugee camp in Bhutan, where they had been for 6 years. So it was a major change. And I don't know if you can scroll to the next picture. These are a little bit out of order, but it doesn't really matter. This is at the airport. This is the very first train they had ever ridden. It's a transport train from the airplane side of the terminal to the baggage claim side. And, this is the bewilderment that a lot of immigrants felt when they came to Ellis Island. It's like, none of us, including you and me, would be here if that Ellis Island thing didn't happen. So it's important to realize that as this story is told from the very beginning. And you can go to the next picture. This is the very first time this guy has been to a real doctor. And I say real doctor because I'm not sure exactly what kind of doctors he saw, but I don't think they had medical degrees in his refugee camp. I could be wrong. But he was freaked out. You can go freaked out about having a shot of some sort of vaccination.
So tell me about your approach. So
yeah. So the approach was unusual. I've continued to work on the project. It's now in a book form, and it's a little bit of a traveling show. It's going to be at American University in Washington, D.C. this fall. American University has been picked on by different groups with racial slurs and different things around campus. I think largely because A, it's in Washington, D.C., and B, it has the name American University. So it's a wonderful school. They're not racist. They're extremely welcoming to immigrants, and they want to put this show up as a way of letting others know how much they care about the immigrant experience.
But I'm more, yeah, okay. So that's like the Johnny Carson plug. But what do you? How? It looks like Johnny Carson. I got to throw that out there now and then. But
yeah.
What I mean, how you're walking into somebody's life. Their life is kind of it's almost unimaginable for them. It's stressful, and then you come along with a camera and you're following them around. What's your approach and what's your workflow look like so that you're actually in the doctor's office when this guy's going through this? How do you even get there? How do you get in the room?
Well, at this point, I'd kind of become friendly with them to a degree. When they first got off the plane, they didn't speak any English, and they were enrolled in English classes. They've taken some English classes, and I can communicate with them beyond sign language and facial expression and body language. In this particular case, they had a interpreter in there. Well, my biggest...
But it goes beyond that, Scott. It's like you have to make a personal connection with these people.
Right. So I had to...
That's what they don't teach you at college. That's what you learn on Washington Street as you're walking back and
yeah. Flip over to the next picture. I think it'll be easier to talk about what you just asked about. This picture right here. I hung out at their little one-bedroom apartment where they had 5 people living for maybe 4 or 5 hours on 2 different days before I was able to have them forget about me in terms of making pictures. You can see in the background the mother inside is watching TV. They didn't have TV where she came from, and she was just glued to it. They started making friends with other people and then other immigrants, which you see in the foreground. You take your shoes off when you go in. So I lived their life with them, taking my shoes off, eating their food, which I did not want to do because they didn't have much money. I didn't want to, but it's part of their culture. I learned through research, you know. So you spend a lot of time in, not infiltrating, but ingratiating yourself in some odd way into this lifestyle so that you can tell some of the different aspects of their new life in this country. It takes a long time. That gets back to what we talked about earlier of not having that time on magazine assignments to uncover this. I mean, imagine if I just did an environmental portrait of these people at the airport saying, hey, they're coming to America, or they just got to America, or an environmental portrait on that couch with the mother in the background. You know, you wouldn't start to learn some of the nuances of the struggle they're facing. So part of what you have learned, Ken, and what I've learned over the years is how spending a lot of time and getting to know these people helps you tell their story. And I just feel very lucky to be part of this project and several other projects that were funded by the Heinz Endowments in Pittsburgh to tell these stories.
So let me just speak on this photo a little bit, because I know you kind of hinted at what you're going for here. And what you've done is you've created, you know, 3, maybe 4 different layers, and each layer of this image has a different aspect of the story to tell. You know, you have this passageway, you're going in and out of the door from one life to the other. You've got the shoes outside, which point to the cultural thing. Like you said, you take your shoes off, the mother's barefoot. You have this technology. You have, you know, the grandmother, I'm assuming, watching TV on the couch. You've got the younger folks with their you know, with their smartphone. But then it's still kind of intriguing because he's sitting on the plastic chair in a not a Western way. You know, you've got all these different levels happening in this image. You know, you've got at least 3 images within your image, and you've got probably 3 layers as well. And so you built this image very purposefully. It wasn't an accident. This didn't come together and you just like were snapping pictures and you're like, oh, that looks good.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how you build an image that has this type of as much information while still being, you know, visually pleasing to the eye. That's something that I don't think they really teach in school.
Yeah, no, it's something that comes with a lot of years, I think. So the first thing I do is I look at the backgrounds before I look at the foreground, because the foreground is going to be whatever you want. You can walk over to anything, but if it doesn't have an intriguing background or a background that helps communicate part of your message. So it sounds odd, but I look at backgrounds before I look at foregrounds. And then I put myself in a position where if I can anticipate correctly, I'll get some background message to go along with the foreground. These 2 guys in the foreground were using a smartphone for the first time. They didn't have a smartphone in Bhutan. So I wanted to photograph them, but if I was standing, say, where the mother of that daughter was standing, I would have missed everything. All I would have had were those people. So I sat myself down in the location I thought might be best. And I sat there for a long, long time. Once in a while, I would laugh at their jokes. Once in a while, they would ask me a question. I would talk to them. But, you know, maybe after an hour or so, they kind of forgot about me. So I'm kind of weaving you into the process. And then if you can anticipate something, you're going to get lucky once in a while. And I think I got lucky when the little girl came out, and they don't have much to play with. She doesn't have any toys. So getting up on a milk crate and looking in the window or pulling the window up and down becomes a toy. And she came out and did that, and the mother was coming out to make sure she was okay. And just at the right moment, you see the grandmother in the background. So it comes from anticipation, but also considering the background first. I don't know if you do that, but if it's a bad background, you're not going to get that layering. You're going to get just something a little more simple, which usually for me is not as evocative or communicative of the situation. So I was happy about this picture. I think that you got the smartphone story, you got the TV story, and that lady literally probably spends 9 or 10 hours a day in that position watching satellite TV from Bhutan. You have to use a caption to explain that because I couldn't get the TV in the picture. But you could talk about the lack of toys for the kids, meeting some new people, starting to become part of the neighborhood. It's a little community where other Bhutanese people are renting their first apartments. So to answer your question, it becomes a nonverbal stakeout waiting game that you're constantly thinking about the picture, but you're also thinking about not being intrusive and becoming a fly on the wall.
So there's an investment, like I said earlier, there's an investment in time for the whole project, but there's also an investment with each situation that you're putting yourself in a position to win, and then you're spending the time to allow yourself to, take advantage of that situation. And so regardless of anything else, you got, like I call them the anchor. So these two guys on the right are kind of your anchor. And I use an anchor to build a photo off of, around or whatever. And the anchor can be anywhere, but I know they're not going to go anywhere,
Yeah.
I have the doorway there and I have the window. And so those are my three other planes of existence. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, you've got the woman on the couch. So now you're just waiting for those other two elements with, the mom walking out and the youngest daughter playing on the milk crate. And so you can't anticipate those, but like you said, you're going to make the investment. You're going to stay there until it does come together. And
right. Yeah.
And if you're sitting there, and this is the thing that maybe people don't get, you could be like, oh, wouldn't it be neat if the mailman showed up and you got like the white guy in the neighborhood, delivering mail to these people who've never had mail, whatever. You think up all these imaginary things in your head that you think are going to make a picture. And the danger is, if you don't have that grounding and like letting the scene take place, you miss what really happens. And what happens on the left side of this frame is something you probably wouldn't imagine. You see what I'm saying? So
absolutely, yeah. So you're right. The anchor becomes them. So the picture, if you can imagine that picture without any of those people in the back, would be an okay picture. It'd be okay.
Right.
So I left space there because I knew. I just know that they don't have a lot going on. They're going to come out in and out, and I'm going to wait it out. I'm going to wait out the left side of that frame. The right side of the frame is all ready to go, and you wait and wait and wait, and you may have to move a little to the left, a little to the right.
But the temptation, I guess what I'm getting at is the temptation for the photographer who's not doesn't have a strong photojournalism base. It's like, oh, let me get somebody to sit on that milk crate to balance out my composition or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what happens, right?
Yeah, but you know what? It's like, and I know you're going to agree with me. When somebody is asked to do something, and like you just mentioned, you can always tell. There's nothing real body language
around it. Yeah.
You cannot simulate authentic body language. You can't do it. You just can't do it. And even people that aren't as tuned into photojournalism as we are, they subconsciously realize that too.
They know in their gut. They can't tell you why.
Yeah.
They can't point a finger at it, but but the image they're looking at will not ring true to them, and it won't have the impact on them for some reason that they can't pinpoint if you start trying to like manipulate the situation.
Yeah, no, I wish we could look at some of your pictures right now of some of the nuanced things I think of from New York City or.
Well, we still got more here. Let's look at the next frame. Okay, so now you're in the grocery store.
So this is the first time um, the lady on the left had ever been in a big box store in her entire life. I wanted to make sure I got a lot of first time things. And as you mentioned, it's cropped off a little bit on the bottom, but that's okay. You still get a good feel for it. And the young girl in the background pushing the cart is her niece, who has lived here for a couple of years, and she's taking her aunt around telling her what to buy and how much to get, trying to explain to her in her native tongue how to navigate a super huge grocery store, where there's stuff going on all around. This is another picture of, and this is an intriguing part of this picture. It's illegal to make photographs in a grocery store. And I knew that going in, and there's different ways you can do it. You can get around that by pretending you're shopping, I guess, and hiding your big camera underneath some food until you see something you want to shoot, and then hoping you don't get caught. In this case, I decided to shoot only with an iPhone because I didn't have a cart to hide my camera. So I would pull it out periodically, and when people saw me, they assumed that I wasn't really a photographer. So the iPhone became a real benefit. This is, I think, the only time I've ever used an iPhone purposely on a serious story I was working on. But it was a big benefit.
Well, I was going to ask you because that's what people don't realize, that people don't realize it's almost impossible, even if you're working for a big magazine, to shoot in a grocery store, a box store, a mall. It's the biggest pain in the ass there is. And we go through this all the time. And usually my approach is to just wait until I get the right moment and then act like I didn't know it was, against the rules. If I get caught, if a manager, busts me or something. But
for those people who haven't tried it, do not ask for permission.
Don't ask for permission. That's right. That's so true.
Turn down. And that's like, you kind of learned, you don't want to, you need to learn to break the rules, but not the law. I mean, I don't think I was breaking the law here. I was breaking a grocery store rule. No,
you were breaking a rule. It's not against the law. And even today, it's funny. Think about concert photography. How many times was that just like a nightmare? Oh, you got to you're shooting for the local paper, and you got to shoot, the concert that night. And it's just like, oh, here we go. And grocery stores are the same way. Malls are the same way. So you don't ask for permission, you ask for forgiveness. And
yeah, it's, I remember sneaking, using a toolbox to carry a camera into a school. All I had to do was get a photograph out of a yearbook. And so I'm totally not really breaking any laws at all. It was a picture of Robert Bork in his yearbook when Robert Bork was on being considered for the Supreme Court. And he grew up not too far from me, and they wouldn't let me into his school. So I just went in there and took a picture of the yearbook and left. And I don't know if I broke any laws or any rules, but nobody was killed. Everybody was happy.
It reminds me of a story. We were talking about Marion, Illinois, and the prison there. And on the bottom floor, where I, ran into a little bit of trouble because I was stupid. The bottom floor is for like political prisoners, and one of the prisoners was Jonathan Pollard, I think his name was. He was a spy.
Yeah, spy.
And I think he's been traded for something. I don't think he's there anymore, but he was on the basement floor, and I kind of peeked into his cell and whatever. But at one point, I don't remember if this was before or after that, I had to photograph his wife when she was in the hospital. And it was like something that, I had her permission and everything. So I was photographing Jonathan Pollard's wife in a hospital in New York City. And I brought an assistant with me because we had permission. It was all, on the up and up. And we had like a donkey bag and 2 cameras and a big tripod because I was going to do some available light thing with her in her hospital bed. And I don't even remember what the story was. So we went and we shot our picture, and we're leaving. We're getting in the elevator, and the elevator door is closing. And right at the end, this big hand reaches in and stops the elevator and does one of those things where the elevator opens with the hands. And it's this huge security guard. He's like 6'5", and he looks at us and he stares me right in the face. And he's like, "I've got to report there's a couple photographers up here. Have you seen any suspicious activity?" And I looked at my assistant, and we've got 2 cameras, a donkey bag, and a tripod that's like 3 feet long, heavy duty Gitzo tripod. And I looked at my assistant, I looked back at the guy and said, "No, sir." He said, "Well,
that's funny. That's hilarious.
oh, but that's kind of, it's like, it's problem solving each and every day. You don't know. It's like, if I would have said, "Yes, that's me."
Well, then, that would have given it away right there. If you said yes, then he would have known,
Well, I mean, it would have went to like the director of the hospital, and the police would have been called, and Life magazine would have been called, and blah, blah, blah. It was so much easier just to say, "No, sir," and walk outside and grab a cab.
Yeah. Never worry about having all that big equipment. That's the moral of that story. Nobody can tell.
I could, anyways, let's go to the next frame. Okay.
So then he got a job. I won't go too much into the different characters, but the guy in his 20s, this guy, got a job making frozen sandwiches, fish sandwiches for a fast food restaurant that we're all familiar with, that he's not allowed to tell me about. So I won't hurt his feelings by telling you. But in a month after this picture was taken, he almost cut his finger off on this machine. Anyway, the interesting thing about this was that he was gainfully employed and was able to practice his English on the job with other immigrants. And so it was a fascinating thing to see him slowly become intertwined into the American way of living and life and working, and think about him getting off the plane and getting on that train bewildered to being a part of the functioning society.
So I gotta ask, I mean, we talked about the supermarket thing. Getting to shoot on a factory floor, whether it's food prep or anything, is also usually you're jumping through some hoops. How'd that go?
Yeah, no, so I showed up at this place thinking I would never get in. So I was following my own rule of do not ask for permission, try to do it without asking. I tried to kind of do it by just showing up one night. He works the night shift, saying, "Hey, I just need a couple of pictures of this guy." I'm playing it way down because I thought if I went through the normal chain of command, I'd get a no. And I got a pretty strong no that night.
Just between you and me, did you use that?
Just between you and me and nobody else. It didn't work, Ken. They caught my bluff, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So the next day I called the proper channels, and then went through the proper channels and came early the next night, and they apologized to me for not letting me in. And the reason I found out is that they have a lot of proprietary operations in here about packing food. This was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and they had somebody standing next to me to make sure I didn't photograph anything proprietary, but they let me in. And sometimes that method of trying to do it without asking permission doesn't work. This is a case where they let me in, and things worked out in the end. But you bring up a good point. It's hard to get into factories. It's hard to
sometimes actually
there's little things you can do too, like the hand coming in on the left pointing.
Right.
People don't really realize how wide some of these lenses are and what.
Right.
So you can photograph things like I'm pointing at him, but I could have been photographing something a little bit to the left. So there's so many different tricks. You know, you might throw a rock across the room to the left, and then they look, and then you take a picture. I'm just kidding, but the wide angle lens thing does help.
No, the thing that's striking, I mean, and it's a point picture. It's a picture that you need for your essay. And so the thing that from just coming from experience, it's the impressive thing to me is getting in the room in the first place.
Yeah.
Comes back to what we've been saying. You got to get it in the room. And then when you get in the room, you know, it's not going to be, you know, whatever. It's not going to be like the packing houses of the early 19th century type of thing. It's going to be, you know, it's going to be a straightforward, almost clinical type of picture. And so the best you can do is once you've gotten in the room, that was the hard part. Now you just have to kind of make a straightforward picture. And if you can get that hand coming in from the left-hand corner, that's kind of your little spin that's about all you can hope for, right?
Yeah. There was actually, when he ate lunch with his coworkers, but I didn't want to burden you with too many images here, but just, you're right. I spent a lot of time there that night, just kind of milking my opportunities. And he took a smoking break about 4 o'clock in the morning, and that was kind of nice outside the building. It showed some of his loneliness. And when he took a smoking break, he was all alone, which is still part of his story coming to a new country, I think, right. Too.
So let's go to the next one.
So this was another one of what I call the first time they experienced something. This was the first bus they rode. They rode to an immigration center to learn about taking English classes and different things the immigration center teaches them. But you know, the pictures I'm making now, they're not quite as bewildered. You know, they were very stoic, worried, concerned, intrigued, a lot of different emotions wrapped up in what their first week was like.
So this is a good example. Okay, this is an image that needs to be in print, or, you know, even looking at it, why, you know, my full screen, there's a lot of stuff that you kind of hinted at. You can see the tension in not only the grandmother's hand on the railing, but the other woman in the back clutching her purse, you know. And so I think that's something that doesn't come through normally in electronic medium when you don't have something that you can really like eyeball and get into. The other thing, you know, the American flag in the background, that would be completely lost. And then the subtle composition, you have this, the windows, the faces with the window light, but then the 3 other people in the frame, you're thinking through all that stuff. You're not just like, it's not just happenstance.
Yeah, no, I think that it's something when I first started out doing this, I don't think I was looking at the whole frame constantly. You know, your eye is constantly looking at every single corner of the frame, and using your peripheral vision as you're looking through the frame to see the parts you're not specifically looking at.
I just want to stress that, because people don't, even the composite, the way that the 2 faces on the left-hand side, the way they're both blocked in a manner, but it's also this great composition. And please watch your step. I usually don't pay attention to words in pictures, because I think that, you know, I think they're like a crutch. But in this case, it's a universal type of sign of caution, like, let's just be careful here. And that balances off with the hand on the railing and the hands on the purse and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot going on in this picture that, like we talked about before, the casual viewer doesn't point those things out, but they ring true and they add to the weight of the image. And
I know you do that a lot. Your pictures are well thought out, and you speak this language very well, looking at the entire frame. You know, almost, it becomes kind of like driving a car after you've been doing it a while. You know, you don't stop and think about where the gas pedal is, but you're constantly looking around and around the frame. I appreciate you bringing that up and talking about it.
Well, you know, I mean, these are things that don't really get discussed on photography vlogs or whatever this is. So that's why we're here. Okay, so that I'm going to stop sharing now if I can figure out how to do this. Okay.
Welcome back, Ken.
It's good to be back. So I think we shared a lot of good information today, and I think we shared some good pictures too, and that's always a plus. I want to David Douglas Duncan's book. We're going to that'll be our link. I'll link to your site too, and I just really appreciate spending this time with you and sharing this knowledge. I think that's what's.
Thanks, Ken. These videos, interviews you're doing, I think are extremely valuable for a lot of reasons. I think you're sharing, especially when you talked about what picture editors are doing and what they did, and you're sharing a lot of things that might get lost in translation of the future to be documented. I think it's important. I remember taking a history class in college, and the teacher said, you know, you're probably wondering why you have to take this history class, and the teacher said, you really don't understand where you are or where you're going until you understand the history of where you came from and how you got there. So you're doing a lot of that, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I believe we have this foundation that everything that you and I have done, we were working on a foundation built by other people that, you know, we didn't invent this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It took time, it took experience, it took money, it took ink, it took paper, it took a lot of people thinking and doing, and so to see that stuff disappear, I think that's that's kind of my motivation here, part of it. So
Well,
thank you, brother. Love you. We'll talk
Thank
again soon.